Now let's join Rick, Bob, Becky, and Dennis as they continue their discussion of collaborative culture.
Some teachers who distinguish themselves in some way, they become nationally board certified or win some sort of an award, will often report that they're, rather than being welcomed, they feel shunned. Mm-hmm. Principals will report the same thing at principals meetings. So I'm thinking about the things that superintendents do at the district level among principals and teacher leaders do in the school that are the very opposite, that create the cultures that pull those people in rather than push them away. And I'm just curious how your experiences have, what they've taught you about how you do that, because it just seems like that's really the kind of at the core of professional learning together.
Well, it is, but I just don't think that's where you start. I think the leadership function there, you back it up to this idea of developing teams, people working together, people having some success together, people building trust together, kind of opening their classrooms, sort of metaphorically speaking. And so people begin to work together, and then lo and behold, guess what begins to happen? You begin trust, and you communicate more, and you start then to share ideas. You begin to, and so I really believe you build those cultures incrementally over time. That it's not something you do where you go to a conference and learn about collaboration. You come back and say, hey guys, I got it. I've been looking for the silver bullet, and geez, I just got it. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to share practices with each other. So on Thursday, I just don't think it works that way. I think it's more of this culture building of opening up your classrooms, working in collaborative teams, building trust. Teaching's a very, very personal thing when you think about it. And so I'm not just going to share things that are highly personal with me just with anyone. I have to build a relationship. So the key is building these collaborative teams to where they're high-performing teams, people working interdependently to achieve a common goal, but they also trust each other, and they like each other, and they work together. And so I think it's a process.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering about is are principals more likely to create that in their schools if that's a part of what they experience in their school systems? Now, I know that there are outlier principals who'll do it no matter what, but does it work better if the principals themselves are part of teams that use those same kinds of processes for continuous improvement? Has that been your experience or not?
For me, it certainly would have worked better that way. I think that I would have been able to implement at the school setting what had been modeled for me and the experiences that I would have had. However, I think sometimes we use the bad practice, the things that aren't so comfortable, to drive some good practice. And as I began this process at Boone's Mill, we tried to celebrate teams rather than individuals. And I, as the leader, tried to look for things that we could celebrate about all teams, so that over time we weren't singling out one or two or three individuals or individual teams, but we were recognizing all teams for something good that they were learning and doing. So over time they began to see that there weren't superstars, but that everybody was growing and learning together. And it developed a culture of more of a comfort level for that sharing process. Once the teams became very comfortable with what each other was learning and we're all in this together, then I think individual teachers did become more comfortable within their comfort zone of sharing some, excellent strategies or learning without the fear of being singled out or ostracized because they were apart from the group.
I never thought it was a prerequisite to have that kind of at the district. It's not a prerequisite. In other words, if it's not there, you can't do it. But I sure think it helps. I think it sure helps. There's another piece to that I just might add. It's very difficult for me to articulate this, but it's kind of what the leader brings to the table in their own personal makeup. I think most of us either have a sort of democratic bent or sort of an autocratic bent. We kind of lean one way or the other. Not absolutely, but on a scale of 1 to 10, we're either 5 and above or we're 5 and below. I think it's very difficult to create the kind of culture we're talking about if it's not natural for the leader to sort of think about just automatically when a problem comes up, having a sort of democratization of that problem. How are we going to approach this as opposed to what am I going to do to solve this? It's sort of a natural way we respond. I think that's very important in the principalship.
It gets back to that old theory X, theory Y. You know, how are human beings innately lazy, or are they innately driven to do their best? And this is something that we've talked about, that when I'm looking at the culture of a school and I see a superintendent who has disdain for the principals, or principals who have disdain for teachers, or teachers who have disdain for kids, that's a pretty unhealthy culture. This is not going to happen in a place where the principal has contempt for teachers, and or superintendents have contempt for the principals. We have to be willing to assume the good intentions of other people, and there are some people who struggle with that.
Sometimes I've thought that what we're asking people in schools to do, most of us are just kind of like ordinary. I mean, we just go through our lives, and we have an ordinary life, and we go to our job and we try to do our best. We're ordinary people, and we're being asked to do extraordinary things here, to educate all kids to pretty high levels, some that we thought maybe a few years ago we couldn't do, and we're expected to get along with each other and work with each other and really open up and talk to each other. I mean, can ordinary principals do this kind of work?
I think the answer is yes. In fact, the most gratifying thing to me, I think, really, the leaders that I see out in school are just that. They're ordinary people with extraordinary determination and drive and persistence, and they're just doing it incrementally every day. Like you said, they go to work. I mean, these aren't the few superstars that are out there, I think. And I think that's more widespread than we'd like to think, or maybe we'd like to think it's widespread. I think it is, but.
And I think ordinary principals and teachers are much more likely to be successful at impacting the learning of all kids if they're doing it in a collaborative culture versus an independent culture. It's much more difficult for one single individual to impact the learning of all the kids or all of the teachers if you're the principal than it is to have a support system in place to impact the learning of everyone.
And then you just face the issue of, if we're relying on that charismatic superhero to carry this, it's only going to last as long as that superhero is there. And when they leave, it all falls apart. So I think we have to operate under the assumption that this is doable, and that our challenge is to make it doable for ordinary people. That if the only solution is to rely on that individual, extraordinary individual, I think we're doomed. There just aren't enough of them to go around.
I think that's in part why the idea of a professional learning community and our work has been so attractive, is that I think people do view it as doable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That it's well, I could do that. That makes sense to me. This isn't, rocket science. It's just a matter of will and work and getting people working together, headed in the same direction, focusing on key fundamental questions. So, yeah, I could do that. I think that's part of the appeal.
I agree.